And the carbonate ions there are a crucial buffer. They're taking up the ions, the extra ions as they're being produced. But as you dissolve more and more carbon dioxide in the water, this disappears. And you then have this situation where these things will dominate, producing more and more hydrogen ions. And these things move into animals, into the cells very easily, so they're likely to affect all of the reactions that are going on in animals. Okay? So here we have the amount of aerobic performance, the amount of work or energy that can be generated. And here you have temperature. And as you get to higher temperature, you can generate less energy. But the effect of the ocean acidification is to reduce this curve so that there's a much more limited range of temperatures at which animals can actually operate and produce energy. So the two things are together. There's also an effect on the skeletons of animals. So a lot of marine animals use calcium carbonate in their skeletons. And the more acid conditions dissolve those carbons. And it turns out that some kinds of carbon skeleton are much more sensitive than others. It's the one with high magnesium, magnesium in it, the calcites that are most easily dissolved. So things like ionoderms and bryozoans have those. And then you have the ragonite, which is the sort of thing you used to find in shells. And then you have the low magnesium calcites. So there are different animals which are going to be affected to different extents by this change in ability to make skeletons. It's also true that when they form the skeleton, they may be able to isolate the area where the skeleton is formed and continue forming it, even though it's very easily dissolved. Now we know that carbon dioxide was high in the Earth's history before. And if it was a key factor in the late Permian extinction, which is a long time ago, and we don't know very much about it, but it was a very big extinction. And what seems to have happened then is that corals and bryozoans and echinoderms were affected much more than mollusks and crustaceans and chordates, including acid. So it may be that these things are more sensitive from what we can see. Yes? Now, animals, as this change happens in the oceans, animals are going to adjust. And very often the current research is to simply take the animals and put them into lower pH water with more carbon dioxide and higher temperatures and say, they can't operate very well. Well, that's going to be bad. This is how they're going to be affected. But in fact, there is adjustment of the individual over time, their acclimatization, and there's also capacity for adaptation, evolution through generations. And we don't yet know how much those effects are going to be important. So we need to start taking into account the acclimation capacity, and it may be that this is less in tropical places, and it may be more if the temperature of the habitat is more variable at the moment. But the work that's being done doesn't completely hold up those theories. Next. It's also possible, of course, that we have changes in migration of fish to areas where their physiology is better suited. And we already know that the fish stocks of the world in the northern oceans are moving further north. We can already see from where the catches happen that catches that used to be caught in southern Atlantic are now being caught further north in the Atlantic, and the same is true in the Pacific, in the North Pacific. Again, we need to understand these physiological effects for each of the species that we're working on before we can start predicting what's going to happen to our fish resources. Next. So when we look at the work today, there's a problem because most of the experiments don't take into account the acclimation, and you get then an effect of stress on the animals. Many of the experiments show that skeleton production doesn't stop, but we don't know what other kinds of effects there are if the animal is maintaining the production of the skeleton, because it's so important to have a skeleton, but there are almost certainly other things that it's not able to do as a result. That's reproduction. We don't investigate those sorts of stress events. So there's lots of opportunities for students to do nice experiments in labs and tanks on these kinds of things that are better than any of the work that has been done around the world before. And the last problem is a very big one. It's hard to account for the amount that you might have of evolution. But just to give you an idea, one study that I've been involved in, I'm an author on this global change biology paper, what we did was we looked at the skeleton size compared to the body size of animals in different places around the world. And in some of those places there's far more carbon dioxide in the water, and some of those there's less. And we found that the skeleton to body mass ratio, the amount of skeleton compared to the amount of body mass, was less where you have more carbon dioxide in the water. So these animals have been there a long time, but they haven't been able to adapt to the extent that they can get the same size of skeleton compared to their body as animals in better conditions. It suggests that even with the evolution, you don't get complete adjustment.
Sorry, time is 1 minute.
Okay, I'll stop there.
Anyone want to ask a question? Is the biological term?
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Day. I want to know how intensive this kind of research now, because I think your presentations will be helping us, to explain to the people. But what is the consequences of the climate change and acidification, etc., to the animal? Because in our training program, people always ask, what is really happening to the animal after the sea temperature acidification, etc.? It means the very simple literature that we can use. Thank you.
Yes, well, this is the reason I'm giving this talk, is because we don't know. And although there have been some good experiments on some animals, and there are probably more good experiments that are happening now, but not enough of them, we certainly don't know what is going to happen to your particular fish in Indonesia. And you need to do this kind of work on the fish that are important here in order to find out what kind of effect you're going to have.
One question for me. Do you think this high temperature and acidification is have a positive effect for the animals?
No, a very negative effect, because they're not able to generate as much energy.
And all of this,
you can't do as much, you can't grow as fast, you can't reproduce as much, you can't swim as fast, you can't do those things that you used to do.
And we think all these negative effects for the animal.
Well, the effects are negative, but the question is how much can they adjust and how much can they adapt and still keep going. So the problem is the stress. It's going to have a bad effect. But how much can the animal adjust to try and still do what it used to do? Okay.
Any question? Okay, we give applause for the interesting presentation. I invite Mr. Adel Seblanco from the Department of Geodetics in the